future. There are no people in the future. No people at all. There are no people in the future. Where did all my people go? There are no people in the future. Let me try my people call. Where are all my people? Where are all my people? I guess I'll fly away now.
Hey everybody, welcome. It is Monday, September 26, 2022. Welcome to Raging Chicken's Out to Coop Live. This is Kevin Mahoney, creator and founder of Raging Chicken. On Out to Coop Live, we talk to progressives, activists, and troublemakers of all sorts, right from our own backyards and from across the country. Shouldn't have drank all that bubble water so fast. You can also join us at the end of our week for our Friday Politics Roundup, where we break down the good, the bad, and the ugly in state and national politics. And, once or twice monthly, we've got the Wednesday show with Cyril Michaleka. Cyril, of course, is the editor-in-chief at the Bucks County Beacon, and he'll join me to drill down into Bucks County, Pennsylvania international politics. You can get all our shows by subscribing to our podcast on Podbean, iTunes, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. You can help support this show by becoming a patron for as little as $5 a month. Well, $5 a month, literally. Good cup of coffee, decent beer, $5 a month. Head on over to patreon.com/rcpress and support all of our shows. You can also help out the show by heading to our YouTube channel if you're not there already. Smash that subscribe button, like the stream for this show, and hit that notification bell so you know every time that we go live. And if you're listening to this as a podcast, give us that 5-star review, leave us the comment, right? All of those things help us get to more people, help other people find our show, and help amplify the reach of the people that we bring on and the work that we talk about in our community. For more PA progressive talk, tune into the Rick Smith Show's live stream at 9 p.m. Eastern on his YouTube channel, Twitter, really wherever you get your stream, you'll find Rick. Head on over to thericksmithshow.com for the latest across all his platforms. And you got to check out the Sisters of the Night Caucus podcast, amazing PA women stirring the political cauldron behind the podcast. Rock the house. And they know where the bodies are buried. Make sure to follow them on Twitter at The Night Caucus and subscribe to their podcast on Anchor, Spotify, iTunes, or wherever you get your podcast. And literally, it's a show you should be following in the lead up to the midterm elections. I mean, you should be generally anyways, but, right now, especially good. Attention all you gamers out there, the Game Inn, 2 N's, the Game Inn is a Quakertown-based black family-owned gaming store. They're friends of the show. They've got everything for retro N64s, the latest consoles, video games for all platforms, collectibles, action figures, Funko Pops, walls of Funko Pops. And kids, you might be just getting yourself a little discount if you get A's on your report card. Check them out on their Facebook page and follow them on Twitter at The Game Inn, that's with 2 N's. If you got a question about a game, look for something hard to get, shoot them a message or drop them an email at thegameinpa@gmail.com. Special shout out goes to Jonathan Mann, who wrote our intro song, There Are No People in the Future. Check out all his great stuff on his YouTube page and follow him on Twitter at SongADayman, 2 N's, at SongADayman on Twitter. And look, folks, don't let Paul Martino and his oligarch friends buy our schools and push extremist politics in our community. Raging Chicken has teamed up with Levelfield to launch a truly community-rooted pact to invest in organizing, supporting local and statewide progressive candidates, and unmasking the toxic organizations injecting our communities with right-wing extremism. We're putting small dollar donations to work to beat back the power of big money. You can get more information and drop your donation at ragingchicken.levelfield.net. Whew. Well, tonight, here we are once again. Well, on tonight's show, we are going to be, want to hear what's on your mind. We're going to probably dig into a couple articles that I've been looking at and want to find out what's happening in your neck of the woods. Really drop into chat and spill the beans. Would like to hear from you. Might talk about some articles I'm reading for a class that I'm teaching. So I got a link to those articles in tonight's show notes. One of them is called "We Are Not All in This Together: A Case for Advocacy, Factionalism, and Making the Political Personal." That is written by yours truly. Yes, indeed. It's a article that got published as part of a collection called Unruly Rhetorics, Protest, Persuasion, and Publics. I talk a little bit about that tonight. There's this other brief article. This one I'm actually reading for one of my classes. We're going to be talking about it tomorrow. It's called What is Peak Indifference? A Theory of Plan for Change. And this is by Cory Doctorow. We had Cory Doctorow on the show, God, almost a year ago now, talking about some stuff that was going on in terms of censorship and kind of big tech and stuff like that. And some of the books that he had put out. We talked about one of his books. So great writer, and just is more productive than anybody I know in kind of like writing. I don't know how the guy finds his energy, but amazing stuff. But this is a really short piece. He had published up on his Medium, and it's kind of a useful way of thinking, about a bunch of stuff. So we'll maybe talk about that tonight. We'll also probably talk about the new article in the Philly Inquirer, Philly Inquirer, I don't know why I said it like that, the Philly Inquirer, about the Pennridge School Board District's upcoming vote. That's, at least discussion. Whether they get to a vote tonight or not is, we shall see. They say probably there's not going to be action on it until next month. But next month is only a week away, right? So, and that has to do with these policies on student expression and teacher advocacy, and kind of supporting LGBTQ students in the schools. As we know, Central Bucks has been a hotspot for this, anti-LGBTQ stuff and policies on, gagging people so that they can't talk about stuff in the classroom, can't show outward supports for students, and threaten to kind of be big brother in the classroom, kind of report them to their parents if they should want to be referred to by other pronouns. But you know the story. But yeah, so Philly Inquirer had a piece in there about Philly Inquirer. I'm sorry, about the Pennridge stuff. So we'll probably talk a little bit about that. Ross says he's seeing a black screen. Is that happening for everybody? Ross, you're seeing a black screen here? Might want to refresh your screen just to see if that's it. Oh, Pennridge meeting is tomorrow. Jenny Stevens got in, so it's not tonight. The meeting is tomorrow. Sorry about that. Anybody else out there seeing a black screen, or is it just Ross? Well, we shall see. Sorry about that if that's the case. Anyways, kind of let's get into it a little bit. So I guess let's start with the Pennridge stuff. So, and it actually has, we're probably going to talk a little bit too, thanks to one of our Twitter warriors, Starry-Eyed. Starry-Eyed basically was kind of posing a bunch of questions and kind of thoughts. We were going back and forth a little bit on Twitter. So I thought that it'd be good to talk about some of the teachers union stuff. And she was kind of responding to me with basically some screenshots I gave of this article. And we could talk a little bit about what the issues are. So we could dive into that part of it. So this article in the Philadelphia Inquirer by Una Gooden-Smith, it basically says, okay, it's a Pennridge School Board is debating policies under teacher advocacy. Here's where those guidelines stand, right? And just kind of an overview saying, here's the kind of stuff that's coming up. There's been some alterations in the original policy. There was this policy on student expression that seemed like it was going to basically come down on any, outward display of, support. I mean, the question was if you wore like a rainbow shirt, was that going to be a problem? Or if you, decided that you were going to wear a cross because, you're a good Christian, was that a problem because of your student expression? You cannot display any student expression, something like this. And there was a lot of debate, discussion about that. And now the school board is saying that the discussion is going to be solely around, it was just about, the rules for posting flyers around campus, around, the schools and stuff. But, this is the issue, is like, there's a big question. And I think that there was a couple folks that were quoted in the article from the Educational Law Center in Philadelphia and some folks from the ACLU. And they're talking about the problems with the kind of policies that suggest, right, or raise concerns that certain kinds of expressions could be censored, or you could get in trouble for them, is going to have a kind of cooling effect, right? A chilling effect, I should say, on kind of people, because they're not going to want to get in trouble. Students are not going to want to kind of, wear something that they think that the school board is going to come after them for. And teachers are not going to want to say certain things if their job is threatened. So there's all these kind of concerns that go into these policies. So there's also a history, right? And this is what's so difficult about reading articles about what's happening in the school board, or listening to statements that are coming out from, the superintendent of the schools or from the school board about what is going to be allowed and what's not allowed and what the policy really means, because they all use this language of, we're just trying to make sure that everyone's going to have their speech rights protected, and we just want to make sure that everybody is going to be able to do what they want. And matter of fact, Ricky Chaikin, the kind of, newly elected right-wing school board member, said she believes the policy expands student expression and actually gives them the opportunity to express themselves in a way the school district does not have to let them do. Right? This is like gaslighting language, right? Because she's making it sound like, oh, these are like, freedom supporting, free speech folks. They want everybody to be able to kind of say what they want. And matter of fact, the school district could be really restricted, but we're choosing to kind of ensure that everybody gets to say what they want. But we know that is not what's been happening in Bucks County schools or in school boards across the country. Right? We know that Pennsylvania, depending on which study and which year you're looking at, we are either number 2 or number 3 in the most amount of books that are being banned or censored or challenged, right, within schools. Right? We're on pace to set a record of censorship challenges that was set, last year. 730 something like that. Right? So you've got all this anti-LGBTQ stuff being promoted from these right-wing school board members. You've got like literally people who are, seem like they're having like Newsmax being kind of funneled into their brains on a daily basis, showing up to school board meetings, spouting QAnon stuff, talking about how they're going to place litter boxes in the hallways because what happens if a kid identifies as a cat, all that kind of nonsense, right? So the context is anybody who goes to these school board meetings, anybody who is following what is happening nationwide with these right-wing attacks through school boards, knows full well that these folks got elected to kind of carry out an agenda, a right-wing agenda against the left, right? What they perceived as the left. It's not even like the freaking left. It's just basically they want everyone to be straight, white, heterosexual Christians. And if you deviate from that, then somehow you're being political. But their advocacy for that stuff is never kind of challenged, right? I mean, that's what's going on. So anyways, there's this one section. So they say, okay, they looks like they're revising this policy on student expression to count just for flyers. We shall see. We shall see. This teacher advocacy part of the article was the one that really just kind of made me just sit back for a couple things. And then I did a little kind of poking around and I found out some more stuff that I found more disturbing for a bunch of reasons. So here's this section on teacher advocacy in this article. It says another policy proposal addresses teacher advocacy in quotes and states that school employees, quote, shall not engage in advocacy activities, unquote, during work hours on school property and must, quote, retain their personal views and remain neutral on advocacy related matters, unquote. Big question here is what counts as advocacy, right? What do they mean by advocacy? And because it's not clearly defined, right, then it's going to mean what the school board members want it to mean, right? So what's considered just people talking and what's considered advocacy. And you get some of this in here. So board members have said that the policy was drafted in response to a small number of teachers advocating for what they called social and political causes in class, pointing as an example, this is key, pointing as an example to teachers distributing forms asking for students' preferred pronouns and permission to share the information with their parents. Okay? So, now, you've got a teacher who is just asking students what their preferred pronouns are, right? Not telling the students that they should do X, Y, or Z, not telling them there's a correct course of action, but responding to what they know is happening, like with some students. And they know, the teachers know, that LGBTQ kids, students, right, who are maybe not have come out yet or things like this, they're also at the highest risks of doing poorly in school, of bullying, and of suicide. And so there's small gestures that one could do to kind of feel like the classroom is welcome. Now, for example, I, like all the time when I'm kind of in different meetings, this kind of comes up. Doesn't come up every meeting I'm ever at, but I don't feel like someone's trying to convince me of something if they ask me my pronouns and I'm saying, he, him. Right? Therefore, everybody knows. What's the big deal? Right? I mean, I don't understand what the problem is, right? So the only reason it's a problem, right, is because there's some kids whose registration says, I don't know, Jim, but they want to be called Emily. They want to be called Jennifer, whatever. Right? And that gives those students an opportunity to just kind of say, hey, yeah. And then there's that question, do I have the opportunity, can I have the permission to share with your parents? Because maybe that kid has not come out to their parents yet, right? Maybe that kid is kind of like working through stuff, trying to understand where they're at, is trying something out and say, no, I'm not, maybe their parents are abusive. So they might say, okay, yes, it says that I'm a boy in my registration. I would like to be called by a girl's name. Right? But no, you don't have permission to share that with my parents. Then the teacher is clear, right? No big deal. But what they're saying here is that this is advocating social and political causes in class. So what they're saying is the acknowledgement that there are non-straight, heterosexual, like white Christians in the class, the acknowledgement of that, the acknowledgement that some of those kids might be trans, that acknowledgement itself is advocacy. But they talk about it in ways that are like, oh, we're just trying to make sure everybody's getting along. And look, there's just a few teachers who are using the classroom to kind of like push their political agenda. Really? Okay. So the policy also follows the board decision last spring to scrap the district's diversity, equity, and inclusion program, with some members concerned over an increase in activism in the classroom, right? They never will talk about what do they mean by this? Are there a whole series of complaints that have ushered forward? You know, is it like a flood of, teachers marching into their classrooms with signs, right? Kind of demanding students stand up and say, pledge allegiance to, I don't know, our communist future? Is that what they're talking about? Of course not. We know what they mean by that. We're saying that, oh my God, there's teachers who acknowledge that racism still exists, that acknowledge that gender roles are much more fluid in the world, that, oh, I don't know, the United States, as part of its founding, committed genocide against American Indians, that there was slavery, and it was slavery, and the slaves did like it, right? I mean, this is unbelievable. So that's crazy. So here you go. So quote, this is from the draft now. Neutrality in both curriculum and classroom instruction is paramount to creating an atmosphere of inclusiveness where all students, regardless of their beliefs and opinions, feel welcome. Do you agree with that? Sure. And this is how they work it, right? Neutrality in both curriculum and thing, right? So for example, as you all know, if you tune into this show, right, I have pretty strong beliefs, right? And I teach. Right. And I teach in things that we don't kind of steer away from issues. We don't try to pretend that the world is kind of some sort of whitewashed, scrubbed down, bleached out version of itself. No, because we're in the real world, right? The real world is complex, contradictory, right? And that's the world that we live in. That's the world that education has to take place, and so on. Right? All that stuff. So, but do I try to get my students, right, to believe what I believe? No. Right? Matter of fact, right, my goal is to, when the classroom situation, is to push them to articulate kind of how they're coming at, how they're understanding things, and so on. As a matter of fact, I've been known to say to students in my class, like, look, I don't want to hear my position mirrored back to me. You know why? Right? Because I know my position already. I'm not interested in you telling me what my position is, because I already know what it is. And matter of fact, if you try to do that, guess what? I'm going to know that you're just doing it just because you think it's what I want to hear, but I'm telling you right now it's not. And how do I know that? Well, because it's my position. I know it better than you. Right? And we talk about, in a democracy, you need to have a variety of people kind of with different perspectives, different angles on stuff. And yes, there's going to be conflict, but that is what democracy is. Democracy is not faith. Democracy is based in the real world and working out really knotty issues among people who do not necessarily agree. And part of what schooling is about is practicing the skills for that kind of society. If I start removing the places where I get to practice those skills of talking with people of differences, of having to kind of grapple with my own position in relationship to other people's, to consider other people who are different from me as like having a legitimate kind of state of or claim on what they believe. Right? Because somebody comes out as trans, that has no impact on me. Unless I believe that everybody has to be like me. Hey, Nick, what's happening? That's the only time it matters. The only thing that a democracy asks for is that people are going to be open to hearing other people and being kind of willing to debate hard issues. Or just kind of understand that there's a whole world of differences out there. This is especially true in a kind of multi-ethnic, multicultural democracy like we have. And it's hard. It's not easy. So when they say that kind of stuff, it's just pretty crazy. So, okay, so here we go. Back to the text. Okay, quote, because personal beliefs about political, social, religion, sexual orientation, and gender identity are often deeply personal and of supreme importance to many members of the school community, staff members should not advocate their personal beliefs in the classroom. What does that mean exactly? If I say that everybody should be treated as a human being regardless of their gender status? Is that advocating for my belief? Am I suppressing the person that believes that somebody who doesn't conform to gender norms should be gassed? Is that what we're talking about? Am I somehow oppressing the fascists in the class? Is that what's going on? I have this little flyer, right? This is kind of right by my my desk. I keep it up here. Right? It's called The Paradox of Tolerance by philosopher Karl Popper, sorry. Right? And I'll just kind of read this. The first scene here goes, should a tolerant society tolerate intolerance? Right? And they're kind of actually crossing out a swastika and say, you want more tolerance, respect my ideas, says the Nazi. Right? Karl Popper says, no. A tolerant society should not tolerate intolerance. It's a paradox, but unlimited tolerance can lead to the extinction of tolerance. When we extend tolerance to those who are openly intolerant, like, let's give them a chance. Let's give the Nazis a chance. Let's give those fascists a chance. Like, let's try to understand the humanness of the white supremacists, right? And allow them some space in our culture too as well. When that happens, the tolerant ones end up being destroyed and tolerance with them. Any movement that preaches intolerance and persecution must be outside the law. As paradoxical as it seems, defending tolerance requires not tolerate the intolerant. And this is from his book, The Open Society and Its Enemies. All right. Now, I have to say, I'm not like, some kind of huge Karl Popper fan that I just like believe everything he believes, right? Got problems with Karl Popper says and all this. But I think that's an important thing. And that's one of those he calls it a paradox. I saw what feels like a contradiction, right? On the one hand, if we want to live in a tolerant society, then we have to basically say those people who are intolerant, right? Those people who believe that there are only this specific kind of gender system works, and anyone else who deviates from that must be destroyed. Those people should be outside the law. You see what I'm saying? So when this says, okay, look, staff members should not advocate their personal beliefs when they're talking about issues of political, social, religion, sexual orientation, gender identity, and so on like this, I'm not in the classroom. These teachers are not saying, it's not to like say, okay, we are going to tell students. Like, if the teacher goes out and says, like, okay, you have to believe that that nobody has, I don't know. You have to believe that kind of like there are, I don't even know what an example is it. But if I had to kind of believe, that if you are a good person, you have to vote for Democrats, right? If I were to do that, that's out of line. That's clearly out of line, right? Because that's a political decision that has to be made. However, as a teacher, if I'm talking about an issue, say, for example, of, I don't know, school lunch funding, I need to be able to talk about the range of ideas and range of positions in that and what's at stake in there. And I should encourage students to be able to kind of hear the differences. I'm not there to tell them this is the correct answer and that therefore you need to believe what I believe. Ironically, the people who have told me that in my own history and what I hear from my own students are not the ones who are supporters of democracy. They're ones that believe in very rigid religious situations, or are these kind of like the old white guys' idea about kind of traditional literature. There's only one way to read Shakespeare, for example. There's only one correct interpretation, right? The originalists, right, in the Supreme Court, same kind of deal. There's only one thing, and these people from on high are the ones who have the answers, and so you need to believe what they believe. The only time that I've run into are not the ones who are tolerant, it's the ones who are intolerant. Does that mean I agree with it? No. But we got to be able to kind of do that. So, okay, so here it goes. So no action on the policy is likely at least until October, according to Bolton, who's the superintendent. He wants to make sure that our curriculum is balanced, neutral, and comprehensive. Like, this is kind of like, there was no problem, there was no issue, right? There was not massive uprisings and complaints until this right-wing agenda started kind of pushing this as an issue within school boards because they want to kind of move it more to the right. Anyways, in the eyes of Witold Walczak, legal director of the Pennsylvania ACLU, the draft is, quote, still vague and overbroad, and he questioned how to define advocacy, exactly what I raised before. Such guidelines may be difficult for teachers to follow. Quote, under those circumstances, when, if you get it wrong, you can get in trouble and lose your job, you're going to stay completely away from it, right? You're going to put a chilling environment on discussion in the classroom. In a September meeting, board president Joan Cullen said teachers should still advocate for students' educational purposes. Oh, okay. So I should still advocate for them and their educational purposes. So let's say they have a disability. Do I advocate for them? If I believe that somebody with a disability has every right to kind of, for accommodations to make sure that they get an education, is that my personal belief that I'm advocating for in the classroom? Is that what's going on? Or is that allowable? Well, you have to consult, the Oracle, Joan Cullen, to be able to kind of figure out what that is. What they mean by these things. They want to use these words to mean what they mean to them and use them against their opponents they disagree with. This is dangerous stuff. Quote, we're talking about different kinds of advocacy which should be best left to parents or guardians or family, she said. Like what? So I want to use the example of, because we know this is true. I want to use the example of a student who is coming out, right? They're finding out they're gay or lesbian or say bisexual, or that they may be questioning kind of their gender identity, whatever it might be, put it on that whole spectrum. And let's say that their parents are completely intolerant, right? And their parents, every time they find out, or say it's a boy, every time the boy kind of does something which the parents consider to be like effeminate, to use like those ancient terms, right? That the father whips the kid, right? We know this happens. So when Joan Cullen says, okay, this is something that should be left to parents, guardians, or families, play that out. She's basically saying, that's their choice. You want to beat the kid, they're going to beat the kid. Not us to decide. Where does that kid go? Who does he talk to? Who does he talk to? Now, this is the part that literally made my jaw drop to the desk. The last line, right? It's the last line. I don't know if you can see it before the heading. It says, the Pennsylvania State Education Association declined to comment on the policy. The teachers union has no comment. PSEA, and in this case, Pennridge Education Association, PEAA, they are the representatives of the teachers. They are their union representatives. And a situation in which a policy that comes from the school board is going to put a chilling effect on their education, putting a chilling effect on what they're going to be willing to do in the classroom, is going to restrict their educational professionalism. It's going to quietly threaten them. They have no comment on. I've said this on this before, and look, let me be clear about a couple things here. I bleed union, okay? I bleed union, meaning that I'm a member of a union. I'm an advocate for unions. I think all workers should be organized, right? Period. Why? Because I don't believe that I don't care if it's a CEO of a company. I don't believe it's the president of the United States. I don't believe if it's like any kind of boss situation that has the control, has the power over everyone else, that they should be left to kind of choose as they will, and we should beg for their goodwill for what we get. Nope. I believe that at the very minimum, workers of all stripes should have a direct impact, a direct say upon their working conditions, right? And I go further than that, because it's not just, shouldn't be just my, like, what I get paid, but it should also be the entire conditions. You know, we want bread, yes, but we want roses too. Yes, we think we should be paid what we deserve. And we get to have a say in that, not just what you tell us we deserve. But also, we should have control over our working conditions. And in the case of teachers, teachers are the ones who have been educated. They're the professionals. They're the experts. They're the ones who should be in the driver's seat. They got to be able to make some of these decisions. Now, does that mean they make them just completely without consultation with everybody else? No. That's what the negotiation process is about. That's what you kind of get into. And I know what the deal is, right? You know, we know that the Supreme Court a few years back, right, basically passed or basically made a ruling that took away, right, the right for unions to collect fair share dues, right? Which basically means, right, because here's what happens, right? If you get a union contract, right, you have to decide as an individual worker at that shop, right? So a school board, so a school, for example, you have to decide whether or not you are going to be a member of that union, right? So I could be, you know, somebody who is opposed to unions, could somebody who does not want to be part of a union, right? But I want to work at that job. So I decline to be a member of the union, which means I do not pay full dues for the union, right? However, the way the law works is that even though I'm deciding that I am not going to pay for the union, right? Even though I'm saying I don't want to be a member, what happens in that situation is that I still get the benefits of everything in that contract that the union fought for, negotiated for. So I'm saying I don't want to be a union, but sure, yeah, I'll take the medical insurance. Yes, absolutely, I'll take the protections. Yes, if I have a problem, yes, I want to use the grievances, and you're going to have to represent me. And the union does have to represent that person. The union has to fight for the union workers and the non-union workers alike. If there's a violation of the contract, it doesn't matter what your status is. So basically, there's a portion of those dues, a portion of the money that you would pay as a member, right? Most of that money goes to defending the contract, negotiating the contract, defending your rights, right? All that's regardless if you're union or non-union. So you have this thing that's called fair share, right? And fair share means that you pay a proportion of those dues. You have to pay to the union, right? The stipulation is none of that could go towards political advocacy. Right. So some years, for example, my fair share dues, I mean, I'm a union member, but fair share dues in my union, that might kind of be like, 80%. Sometimes it goes as high as 90% if there's not a big, it kind of alters each year. You get a statement in the mail that says this is the amount that's tax deductible. If you're a fair share person, you get a statement about what percentage of your dues are and where it's going to, right? But that was just ruled unconstitutional by the Supreme Court, by the right-wing Supreme Court, right? Okay, so that happened. So now what happens is public sector unions went into a tailspin, right? Because they were freaking out because they were going to say, oh, look, if somebody basically says, I don't need to pay anything, but I still get all the benefits of a union, right? So I can basically, I'm going to get that union contract, but I don't have to pay a dime. So I'm going to get more money from myself, right? They can still do that. So these public sector unions and teachers unions in particular started freaking out. They're like, oh my God, we're going to lose all these people. And the reason why they were freaking out about it is because for decades, there has been a slide in union leadership into what we might call business unionism or service unionism, where there's the union and then there's the members. When you talk about the union in your brain, you're thinking about the leadership people that are off someplace else, not you and your coworkers. Right? And when you say the union is here, you mean, oh, the representatives came in, they drove in from wherever they work, and they kind of came in here, the representatives. Those people are employees of the union. They're not me. They're not fellow teachers. Sometimes they might have been at one point, but now they work for the union. So the union is this other entity, right? And then some union leadership started acting like that too. And they basically said, we want to make sure that our members or we want to make sure that these teachers are going to continue to be members. How do we do that? We service them. We kind of get them good contracts, right? And we don't ask them to do anything else, right? Because we are maintaining our thing and we are the experts in what we do in the union. And so they are not, they are just kind of paying members. So we do this on behalf of the union members. And the exchange is like, members are like, well, okay, I kind of wish I had some more input, but I guess if they're doing a good job in a contract and I'm getting a decent pay and I got medical insurance, okay, great. I'll support them for that reason. But there's a growing gap, right? A growing gap in skill levels. And when you have now a decade-long, overt, frontal assault on unions, right? Public sector workers, private sector workers, the working class in general, when you see that assault on people, on unions, the unions are unprepared for the kind of organizing that needs to take place, right? The union leadership has wanted their members to be quiet, right? They didn't like it when their members got all riled up. They didn't teach their members how to organize their workplace. They didn't teach their members about how to advocate publicly for education, how to push back in your workplace. And they said to them, hey, we're not going to stand behind you. And then the union itself was like, well, we're just kind of, we're kind of like, we've got a good relationship with the people on the other side. So, we don't want to jeopardize that relationship because that's how we get good contracts. Now we're seeing the people on the other side, the school boards themselves, they could care less. As a matter of fact, they're anti-union. They're coming for the unions. And now unions are in a situation where you've got a lot of these old style leadership folks who say, oh God, there's all these controversial issues. We got to shut our mouths. Because if we weigh in on it, we might lose some members or we might upset the board and they're not going to give us our good contract. What are we going to do? That is an understanding of power, of worker power, of being the relationship, union leadership or negotiators, the good relationships they have with management. If they can buddy with them and they could kind of, be their friends and they could kind of go out and have a beer together and all that kind of stuff, that's how they get the job done. It's the backroom deal model of unionism. When we know full well, if you read any of the history of the United States about the labor movement in the United States, workers have never been given anything out of the goodness of the hearts of management. They fought, bled, and died for every right that we have had. But we've fallen into, a lot of unions have fallen into this malaise where they believe that, no, we're just going to keep the old guy going and we just got to hold on to what we got. And we're at this point, it's a crisis point, where if union members, if teachers themselves don't start organizing within their workplaces, they're going to lose their good contracts. These school boards are coming for the teachers. Don't, mark my words. The Pennridge contract is up in 2023, June 2023. You see the same thing that's going on over in the Central Bucks, where Paul Martino basically called out, basically saying, teachers' contracts coming up you and you got endorsed by the teachers union, so you and you should recuse yourself from the contract negotiations, because he's an anti-union guy. And I have to say, I have tried over several years, and again, I'm not going to say I was going and kind of batten down the doors of the teachers unions, but I've reached out to teachers during contract negotiations. I've reached out to PSEA. I've reached out to other folks affiliated with union. I put out multiple calls hey, any teachers, any teacher union members who let me know what's going on. I've sent email and, a couple times the guy was like, oh, that's great to know. Thank you for your support. But that's it, right? Nothing. And I don't know what to make of that. And then meanwhile, the thing that got the bee in my bonnet initially is that PSEA has played, we'll see where this ends up this year, has played the role of, okay, we're going to try to kind of we're going to play both sides of the fence. So we're going to endorse Fitzpatrick, right? PSEA has endorsed an anti-abortion, school privatization, right? Trump voting Republican over and over and over again. because they don't want to get in the bad graces of the Fitzpatrick machine. Right? Jenny says this is why PSEA gives money on both sides. Yeah, that's true. PSA gives money on both sides, right? I understand the game and how the game is played, but when you give a political endorsement, here's what happens, right? When PSEA is one of the major players, right, when it comes to kind of more localized politics and funding, like on broadly educational issues side of things, right? And when they give money and they kind of mostly because they're trying to make sure that they're going to get their issues heard on both sides. I get that. I understand that. But also what happens is PSEA organizes a lot of get out the vote stuff. They actually help support a series of other organizations for get out the vote, right? So their money is kind of invested in kind of a whole bunch of, a network of folks that are, advocating on behalf of kind of education or all this kind of stuff, right? And that's all fine and good. All organizations do that. I think that's the way it should operate. But here's what happens. Now, when PSEA now then endorses Brian Fitzpatrick, and if you ask people in the movement, right, about what has happened in terms of like the support for particular candidates, particular Democratic candidates, when PSEA jumps into the fray and basically says, hey, we endorse Brian Fitzpatrick, all those other organizations that might get some money from PSEA or want to have a good relation for PSEA, they leave. So suddenly the money, the organization, the structure, and the people on the ground for get out the vote disappear. And I know I'm picking on PSEA right now, but this is just because of this particular article, right? We could say the same thing about Penn Environment. Penn Environment played the same game with Brian Fitzpatrick. Right, we can go down a list of organizations if we want, kind of like ostensibly on the kind of like center to left, who have played this game and that are doing it in a way that is negative. So all that money goes out, right, and then people are left to just try to put it all together, right? This has been part of a dynamic in Bucks County for a long time now. The question is, at this stage of the game, when teachers are being directly attacked, where is the public voice of the union? My guess, and I would love to have somebody from PSEA come on, right? From one of the kind of, in Bucks County come on and kind of talk to me about this and help me understand better, right? To tell me why I'm wrong. And say that the reason why PSEA is not coming out with public statements right now is because, well, they're worried because then if some of their members are Republicans and so on. Yeah, I get it, right? Some of your members are Republicans, right? Maybe even a kind of fair percent. But at what point do you take a stand and say, this is what we need to defend education? How is it that you have stopped educating your members on the need to fight for academic freedom, for example? Where did that go? So all that goes in. And I have to say, I wanted to see today. So I was just like, that was upsetting to me when I read that. Because I'm like, how could you have no comment on this? I mean, even if you wanted to be wishy-washy in what you're going to say, how can you have no comment on a policy that is basically threatening your teachers, your members? And on the flip side of it, like anytime you flip that around, as I can tell you this too as well, is my own union falls into the same kind of stuff. The only solution here is for members to organize themselves, to start organizing in caucuses. They did this down in Philly for a bit. The Caucus of Working Educators, great organization. Basically ran union candidates because they wanted to change the leadership in the union. They wanted to basically get members involved. They wanted to have an organizational structure to not this service model where people in the kind of like, more highly paid positions within the union are the ones who do all the decisions and you just kind of like, go down here. No, you're out in the community. You're organizing. You're kind of talking to family members. Is that the teachers are organizing in such a way that it's going to be clear that they are the ones on the ground that are connected to the students. They are the ones on the ground that are support the families. They are the ones like in the community that make education happen. So when it comes time for a union vote, right, the families or the people in that district, they're not looking up at some some person who's like a representative of the union in some sort of office someplace. No, they're thinking about the teachers in their community, that teacher that showed up at their door that helped their kid, right? And that's what they did to Caucus of Working Educators, right? And you see this in a bunch of caucus. They did the Chicago Teachers Union. They had a huge strike that took place. That's what they did. Social movement unionism. That's what they did. And until members organize themselves, it's my belief, right, to push back against this kind of malaise in their leadership, or the lack or the unwillingness to take the stand on things, right, then this will continue. And why this is a concern for me is because you're going to reach a particular point in which there is no point of return. Is that the lack of taking a stand has made people cynical enough, has made people kind of like feel like, look, there's nothing I could do. I'm despairing. Nothing's going to change it. It's just going to keep on doing this. And so they go back, and guess what happens? More people leave the union, and the union collapses. And if you don't think that the right wing doesn't think about this all the time, about a way of kind of driving these wedges and kind of destroying the union through the frontal assault and through kind of a war of attrition, if you don't think that's going on, you're nuts. I've seen it again and again and again. And it's not just me. Just read some recent labor history since like 2009 about some of the attacks that have gone against unions. We're lucky at this point in history, however, is that we have counter models. We have the rise of the Amazon labor union. We have the kind of Starbucks workers union. We're seeing organizing at unprecedented levels, right? At least in our lifetimes. That gives a counter to this. So we saw what happened in Kentucky when the state tried to kind of destroy kind of like education and fire all these teachers in a state, right, where it was illegal for those teachers to strike, right? In a right to work state, those teachers organized and they went on strike anyways. And they won. And they did it because they organized. And guess what? The union leadership was against the strike until it started to work. Then suddenly they had their come to Jesus moment. They're like, oh, yeah, we support the people on strike. Yeah. But they had to be dragged kicking and screaming there. Right? Institutions have a way of doing this kind of stuff. They want to solidify the organizational structure, that hierarchical organizational structure, and the people at the top want to tell the people at the bottom that they don't know what they're talking about. They want the people at the bottom to stay relatively quiet so that they can handle things up here. And there's a kind of growing disparity that happens all the time in institutions. What we always have to do is revitalize those institutions by kind of, especially in a democratic organization like a union, the people need to be involved. Members need to be involved, right, actively. So anyways, so that's that thing was going on. Now, there's other things in this article too as well. They talk about, they go and they say that, these, anti-LGBTQ stuff, where the Pennridge basically wanted the rainbow flags taken down for classrooms and all this. That's not going away either. And it looks like over the next couple months, we're going to see this consistently on the agenda for school boards. So we have to watch that. So why am I telling you all this stuff tonight, right? So why is that important? And why do I say I'm going to look at a couple articles? So I wrote about this in, I mentioned this in the show notes, right? And talked about it at the beginning of at the very beginning of the show. And I teach this class at Kutztown called Activist Writing Media. Right. And so we look at the relationship between kind of social movement media and social movements. Right. We look a little bit at some of the kind of the strategies and the tactics and some of the studies, and looking at how social movements work and how they're effective, and some of the ways that the cycles of social movements, a whole bunch of stuff like this. And then we consider, looking at these organizations, whether the media is generated by the movement itself, whether it's independent publications that are kind of broadly affiliated with a movement, critical voices, a whole bunch of stuff like this. So that's kind of what the course is about, looking at those interactions. And tomorrow, actually, we're going to be reading this one piece. It's by this guy, Cory Doctorow. It's a really short piece. He tends to write these kind of really short pieces, which is pretty cool. He's a science fiction writer. He's a blogger. He's a tech activist, and so on. You can check out his stuff at pluralistic.net. You can check him out. Follow him on Twitter at Doctorow, DOCTOROW, and all this. And there's a link in the show notes to this. But let me read you a little bit of this and say why I think this was this is good. I mean, it wasn't intentional that all this stuff would be coming together right now, but here you go. So he says, back in 2016, I coined the term peak indifference to describe a political phenomenon when people who have denied an urgent problem begin to self-radicalize, not because of activist or public education, but because the problem has caught up with them personally. Right? Rick Smith from the Rick Smith Show had a different version of this, a slightly different version of this. We would call it radical self-interest. Right? At that point when you can't deny the problem anymore. You've been indifferent for so you hit this peak of indifference because you are forced by circumstances to grapple with the urgent problem. Right? And he says, as I've written here before, a neat microcosm of peak indifference is smoking. Even if you convince yourself that tobacco isn't that bad for you, if you keep smoking long enough, you will likely come to understand that it is very bad for you, because stage 4 lung cancer is convincing in a way that even the most persuasive talk with your family doctor can never be. Right? That idea, when you hit stage 4 lung cancer, you are forced to acknowledge, right, how bad smoking is for you. Right? The problem is, of course, is that if you're talking about that, and that's a kind of really I guess, pointed example, because once you hit that stage 4 lung cancer, it's too late. Right? Smoking and continuing to smoke and ignoring that, yes, eventually the consequences come to you. And eventually you have to grapple with it. And eventually you have to kind of come to terms with it. Right? In one way or another. But with stage 4, that's beyond the point of no return. Right? It's too late to have any meaningful difference. And this is true, what Doctorow argues in this, is that across things. So if you think about nuclear disarmament, climate action, inequality, all these things, the rise of fascism, right, in this country, is that if you ignore it and say, whatever, just these few marginal people that are going on here, by the time they actually take over, right, then it's too late. So what Doctorow says is foundationally, indifference is a predictable response to problems whose causal relationship is obscure, for example, climate change. If you can't tell for sure that driving to the corner store for a pint of milk will cause you to drown in a deluge in 50 years, it's easy not to care about it, right? The job of activists confronting this class of problem is to turn the indifference into opposition. That really is the challenge, right? Is kind of thinking about what that means. And he puts another way: everyone whose house is washed away in a flood or whose town is incinerated by a wildfire becomes a climate change partisan without having to be persuaded by an activist. Personal trauma is the ultimate persuader, as he says. The problem with relying upon peak indifference to mobilize a response to a problem are twofold. First, peak indifference may arrive after the point of no return. When that happens, it's easy to turn to nihilism. Well, I guess my doctor was right all along. These cigarettes did give me a stage 4 lung cancer. Guess it's too late to quit now. Right? We think about climate change, it's the same thing, right? Well, oh God, yeah. Looks like, those like several million people who died from heat in this one place. Oh, they're dead now. Yeah, I guess they're right about climate. Whoop. Too much. Guess they're right about this. But I guess we should stop using fossil fuels. Oh, too late. The Antarctic ice sheet just collapsed. And now we've got a series of runaway problems, right? I mean, that's the kind of idea. And there are some, there's these people on the left. There's some people on the left who kind of argue for this, they say that, okay, you have to wait for the crisis, right? You wait for the crisis and then you can act. Right. So our goal up until now is to either accelerate what the crisis is. Right. They have to have more fossil fuels because it becomes such a problem that people will finally react. But then it's too late. And then he says peak indifference doesn't in and of itself mobilize an effective response. Trauma can hinder reason. If your town is incinerated by a wildfire, it might inspire you to become an eco-fascist, advocating for zero immigration and conquest of high-lying territories abroad to protect you and your fellow Americans from the coming collapse of the habitable earth. This is one of the things that I think I talked about last week or maybe on Friday, is that, there are going to be massive amounts of climate refugees as a result of climate change. And when we hit that first tipping point, when you start to see, whole countries flooded and we're seeing it, some of it right now in Pakistan, right? Third of the country underwater. There are going to be climate refugees, right? So one version is that, oh my God, this is coming. We need to prepare for these mass migrations, right? We need to find ways to make sure that people are going to find safe, and we should do it now as opposed to later. Another version of that is the build a wall version, right? That's the kind of eco-fascist version. And my belief is that is the most likely pathway at this point. Because when the best that we can do in this country, for example, is pass legislation that is going to kind of like encourage the market to do better, it's not enough. And then you hear some of these kind of like, Democrats say, well, okay, we're going to get to a point where nobody's going to be able to ignore it like anymore. True. But the people right now who are in the position to respond to that situation are not going to be progressives. They're going to be the authoritarians. They are going to be the eco-fascists, the ones who say, yes, because all the people from these non-American countries, these non-Christian countries, are going to be forced to flee because of climate, because we are the kind of graced land or whatever. We have to close our borders. We have to militarize our borders to ensure that they stay out. We got to keep out those people who are fleeing. We have to topple the Statue of Liberty, right, and erase her book. Give me your tired, you're poor. We need to eliminate that. We need to sink that into the memory hole, because we are no longer that. The Statue of Liberty is dead, right? Long live the castle wall, right? That's kind of that thing. We've seen this come up, right? We saw the mass killing in Christchurch, New Zealand. That there was part of that manifesto that was released there was exactly along these lines. You're seeing right now in Europe, you just saw a far-right neo-fascist party basically win a huge percentage of the vote. I forget what the final percentages are. But in Sweden, why? Well, guess what? Kind of lily-white Sweden, right? As good as its social infrastructure is, they basically are saying, we want to keep that social infrastructure for ourselves, which means we need to keep out these brown people who are fleeing the climate catastrophes or wars or whatever it might be, right? We just saw another, like, in Italy, right? The woman who's taking over kind of in Italy, who's going to be the next prime minister of Italy, is basically as far right as Mussolini. That party has openly called like what the brother or something or other. They're openly basically long for the days of a return of that strong leader in Italy, and now they've got it. Right? So that's that point. You cannot wait for the crisis to do the work for us, right? We cannot wait for that. We have to do it now. And again, lots of people are doing the organizing. Let's be clear. Well, Cory Doctorow says the activist mission implied by this analysis is twofold. One, hasten the moment of peak indifference, right? Foment protest, art, especially speculative fiction, either utopian, we can do this, or dystopian, we must do this or else. Like conduct education or do anything else that makes the distant risk more present in the minds of the still indifferent, right? And we've seen this in our communities, right? We're seeing this starting to happen, and it's so freaking amazing, right? And the question is, we're in this race, right? Because as all that is happening, right? As the fomenting, the protest, the education, the organizing that's going on, we are in the position where that other side is occupying the institutions that pulls all the levers of power. So it's like, not only do we need to do the education, not only do we need to do the organizing, but we also then have to ensure that we take over these levers of power. And the second thing is the direct response of people who are mobilized by trauma into productive directions, countering eco-fascist narratives of lifeboat rules with climate justice, remediation, and land healing, right? So that idea that we need to find these things where we're kind of like showing what else can be done, showing that other world can be possible, right? I'm just going to forget. I had this down. I was just searching for it at one point. I don't know what happened to it, but I was reading this article earlier when they're giving examples of what people are actually doing and some positive examples. And there's this one community, I just can't remember where it was, right? But it's going to be impacted by by rising seas, right? And it's going to have a huge negative impact, and it's going to be flooded. So this is a locale, right? This is not statewide, this is locally. And what they're in this one kind of district, they're recognizing that their area is going to be underwater. So they've already started putting money into this particular climate resistance fund. And they're going to be buying out the homes of the people who live in those areas, right? So the municipality is going to do that, right? And at the same time, they're in a higher ground elsewhere. They're bought land or are buying land, and they are going to be building homes for those people to relocate to. And it is tax dollars that are doing this, right? And the community is on board with this. It's an amazing moment, right? But it's a little tiny one. It's by no means enough, right? But it's showing what we could do and what we need to be doing. So those kind of examples are absolutely critical, right? That's what Cory Doctorow means by, you got to counter those eco-fascist narratives with this idea about climate justice, remediation, and land healing, like that. The conversion of these kind of mass factory farms into kind of like sustainable kind of like mixed-use agriculture, for example, right? Bringing more communities kind of involved with farming and get us kind of bringing the food sources closer to where we're at. Investment in rail, right? Instead of more cars, right? All this kind of stuff goes on. So anyways, wow, I spent a whole lot of time on that. Sorry, everybody. Thanks for all the comments. Yeah, Nick and Jenny and Ross and everybody here tonight. I thought I was going to talk about a lot more than that, but I'm already looking at the time like, holy crap. Yes, trains, Nick. Trains. The one other thing I wanted to say, and I'll put a link for this. I'm just not going to have a ton of time to do this tonight, but there's this little book here. It's called Unruly Rhetorics. And I put a link to the PDF, again, in the show notes tonight. It's for an article that I wrote, a chapter I wrote for this book, called "We Are Not All in This Together, A Case for Advocacy, Factionalism, and Making the Political Personal." And here, I'll read one paragraph for you and then kind of give you a little concluding thing here. So why I thought this was important just in terms of our orientation to the world. So in the wake of the Wisconsin uprising, this is in 2011, liberals such as so for those folks who might not remember, this is when you had the governor of the state of Wisconsin was basically eliminating union rights, was trying to destroy public higher education, was removing rights from, medical rights or access to kind of medical care for a whole bunch of people. There's a whole bunch of stuff. It was like the playbook of the far right Republican Party at that time. And it was swept into office by the Tea Party. And the response in Wisconsin, they basically took a page out of the book of what was happening in Tahrir Square in Egypt, right, about this mass occupation. And so people converged on the Capitol, kind of led in part initially by some well-organized people at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, which was, Madison is where the Capitol is. And they occupied the Capitol for several weeks, right, to push back against these things. And that got termed the Wisconsin Uprising, right? It was a really amazing moment. Okay, but then you got Roger Hodge looking at these, these union people and these farmers and these students and these activists, occupying a state capitol and protesting, sleeping on the floor, refusing to move, all this stuff. And, the kind of like pearl clutching liberals like Robert Hodge want to make sure that, find that greatly distasteful, right? And I'm not, okay, whatever. So here we go. So liberals like Roger Hodge, writing in Politico, urge fellow well-meaning folks to look to the Federalist Papers co-signer and fourth U.S. President James Madison. Hodge made the case that an American left, quote, seemingly bereft of principles, unquote, should seek to reclaim Madison's notion of Republican liberty and principle that, quote, derives its energy from the will of society and thus acts in the larger public interest, not in the narrow interest of a particular faction, whether composed of planters or financiers, unquote. Well-meaning for sure. Hodge closes his case with the following, quote, even in our unhappy political circumstances, most Americans retain a profound attachment to the Madisonian principles that were meant to animate our constitutional system. We may yet rediscover the common ground on which to build a coherent, public-spirited opposition to the narrow factionalism of our current two-party system, unquote. Hodge's critique of an American left, quote, bereft of principles, unquote, his longing for that common ground, his characterization of our current political circumstances as unhappy, his appeal to most Americans, and his use of the conditional may to hedge on a future common ground are all elements of a popular liberal sentiment with the Founding Fathers twist. However, this kind of response to an open war against working families did more to discipline those bodies sleeping on the marble floors of the Capitol in Madison and similar mobilizations than it did, or does, help reinstate political common ground. In my mind, the appeal to Madison's warning against factions in our current political environment is a philosophical luxury if the goal is to defend democracy. The founding father who seems more appropriate to our unhappy times is not James Madison, but Thomas Paine. Right? And I make a case in this that Thomas Paine, why that becomes important to reclaim what Thomas Paine does, was that Thomas Paine was facing similar things. We know his book Appeal to Reason was the most widely circulated and published book at the time. It was, in large part responsible for spreading support for the American Revolution. And he was someone who was arguing, right? Had to argue with some, say, good-meaning liberals who, said, like, we agree with what you want, just not how you're going about it, right? That classic move that we see over and over again, right? We just want you to kind of be more respectful and just wait your turn, right? It'll come, just gonna be slow, right? Just being so rude, right? I mean, that's kind of these ideas. So there was this thing called the Epistle to the Quakers, where the Quakers were basically making this open appeal to basically not resort to violence in the revolution, right? Again, I want to be clear, we're not advocating violence here, things like this, but it was that kind of particular sentiment. And what basically Thomas Paine basically said, look, the British have been slaughtering us, right? That's why people are upset. They've been taking things. They've been kind of stealing from us, right? They are the ones who are perpetuating the violence. And the longer we allow this to go on, right, the longer we can guarantee that that violence will continue. We need to stand up and resist so that we can stop the perpetual systemic violence so that we can have a democratic culture. All right. And I don't want to kind of waste too much of your time here with this, but the whole point of here and what I start kind of talking about here is this idea that we see come up again and again. And I'm thinking about phrases and discussions that I think are important that all of us are having within kind of, say, in our communities and activist communities and so on, because it is so easy to discipline people by saying, look, you're just being so uncivil, right? And we know there's a racial overtone to that too as well. Because like when a black person gets upset, right? Guess what, right? They're the angry black guy or the angry black woman, right? And they get put into a category and their words don't have to be addressed, right? When activists are kind of like fighting to try to, climate activists, for example, we're legitimately, like, millions of people are going to die unless we have action. It's a crisis that requires serious response. And yet we have governments, our government and across the world, piss around. You have to be disruptive. The history of social movements in this country, in this world, the only way that workers, the mass amount of people have gotten things has been to disrupt the system as it is. And yes, it is uncivil. We read this book, there's another one right here, called This is an Uprising, right, by Mark and Paul Engler. And Mark and Paul Engler, they talk about the kind of disruption and division. Right? This is how social movements have to work, right? You have to be aware that you are never going to please everybody, right? And then we should be okay with that. Does that mean that we kind of alienate everybody? No. What it means is that you need to move people over to your way, and you have to disrupt the patterns of violence. The examples that they use in This is an Uprising, you look at ACT UP, right? And the AIDS crisis. People were dying. right? Tens of thousands of people are dying, and they're being ignored by medical professionals. They're being ignored by governments. They're being ignored by everyone else. So what do? Yes, they got into the House of Representatives and poured glitter on everybody, which I thought was one of the best moments that I've ever seen in my life. Right? They sat down in the streets and stopped traffic. Right? They got in people's faces when people were afraid of people with AIDS. Right? And yes, some people will never ever like the folks from ACT UP. But you know what? After years of delay, a decade of delay, ACT UP comes in a relatively short period of time. Suddenly they're finding to see movements on the medical front for allowing the approval of these drugs to treat AIDS. Right? They're looking for funding that's going on because they're not going to be denied. They're going to be forced to be seen. That's what Black Lives Matter was all about. The systemic violence of police killings has to stop. Wishing it away and hoping for the best and praying your hearts, your thoughts and prayers wasn't getting it done. And it will never get it done. What that looks like in our communities right now, I'm not sure. I'm nervous about the midterm elections coming up, right? They're coming up in just over a month. So yes, we have to get people elected. Yes, we have to do it. And I know there's amazing people that have been knocking doors nonstop, right, to make sure that these far-right Republicans are not reelected and not kind of not reelected, number one, and that kind of a Democratic majority in the state house and the kind of in Harrisburg becomes even possible. And are those Democrats that we're kind of working to elect, are they, the perfect candidates? I don't know. I've certainly been talking about on this program how I'm extraordinarily frustrated with Josh Shapiro's campaign. Right? And I'm already seeing where I'm going to fight that guy after he gets elected. But you can be damn straight, I'm going to vote for him. You can be damn straight, I'm going to encourage other people to vote for him. Right? Because the alternative is a Christian nationalist fascist, right? And guess what? I know that I will have zero leverage. You will have zero leverage against a Christian nationalist fascist, right? But you might be able to push Josh Shapiro a little bit, right? Because at least he makes claims to be supporting things like public education. Even while he gets kind of in bed with the charter school people. But that's a whole other ballgame. Yeah, I did, Nick. I just saw that the split endorsement from the cops with Shapiro and Oz. Yep. So I just saw it actually shortly before the show. I saw this came up on Twitter, and I was like, oh, there you go. There you go. Right? And why does it, and I'll say it again, I say it every week. When we talk about Shapiro's campaign, the thing that concerns me is that while he's using the classic kind of like triangulation strategy that the Clintons are using, trying to move to the center and court Republicans and court the right wing and court the cops, is that what he risks doing is alienating the base that is going to be required to get out the vote. And I believe had Roe v. Wade not been overturned, I think his strategy would have sank him. Thankfully, well, it's a horrible thing to say thankfully, we're talking about the overturning of Roe v. Wade, but thankfully in the wake of that, right, the women who have been organizing, and it is, again, primarily women who are organizing around getting candidates elected and around the issue about having their rights stripped away from them, right? That organization is what is going to potentially, that will be the deciding factor in my mind. Women organizing is what's going to kind of make this election. Women and their allies, right? More broadly around that issue, particularly of abortion rights. So we shall see. But that's kind of where we're at. That's kind of where we're at. Anyways, I kept everybody long enough tonight. I'm just kind of yabbering on. I've got so much on my mind these days. It's been it's just been one of those. It's been one of those times. It's like oh, thank you. Jenny Stevens just said here, big rally in Doylestown on Wednesday at 5:30 to get out the vote and support pro-choice. Jenny, if you got a link to that, you can drop in chat. That would be freaking awesome. Otherwise, I'll try to look it up and put it in chat afterwards. We should also give the shout out to the Banned Books Week parade that took place in Doylestown. We had folks that dressed up in the giant cardboard books of banned books to raise awareness about, obviously about banned books, but in particular in the Central Bucks School District and throughout Bucks County, where books are being banned in our schools. That was freaking awesome. So yes, you've got lots of stuff going on in Doylestown. If anybody does have the link to that rally in Doylestown on Wednesday at 5:30, you could just please drop it in the chat. That'd be fantastic. Otherwise, I'll try to check it out and put it in afterwards. But yes, stuff like this. If you are around on that Wednesday at 5:30, that'd be fantastic. Yeah. So, man, did I yabber on tonight, huh? How about that? It's been an interesting week. It's been an interesting week, interesting weekend, and there. So Jenny says Old Bucks County Courthouse. We'll send more details. So you may post. Okay, so it's at Old Bucks County Courthouse, and then we'll check more details out, and then we'll kind of post it out. Make sure you follow us on Twitter at RC Press, and then we'll make sure that gets tweeted out there too as well. The other thing you should look, we didn't have enough time to talk about this tonight, but you remember a couple weeks back we had Jennifer Cohen on the show talk about rising Christian nationalism and things like this. Today, in the Bucks County Beacon, she just published a phenomenal piece on this. And of course, wouldn't you know it, that I have got the somehow I managed to delete the title on it here. So hold on a second. Here it is. It's she got a new piece called Christo-Fascist Salutes Displayed During Recent Mastriano and Trump Rallies. She is continuing kind of digging down into how these kind of white nationalists and Christian nationalists are working together around Stop the Steal, and are now kind of really, doing some creepy stuff that is very cultish and very troubling, especially given the concerns that we have about growing fascism and right-wing extremism in this country and this kind of, in the state. So do check out her piece over on the Beacon that was just published today. And again, check it out at buckscountybeacon.com. It's right up in the kind of recent articles, and you can check it out under, I think it's listed under opinion, or the top 5 articles are out. So do check that one out too as well. And great work once again by Jennifer Cohen and everybody at the Beacon. Okay, everybody. Okay, everybody. I'm going to call it quits at this particular moment. I've got an early start in the morning. Make sure the kids are in bed. They had the day off today, so that kind of throws everything off a little bit too as well. Here we go. So everybody, this is Kevin Mahoney, founder and creator of Raging Chicken. You can help support this show. You can help support all the work that we do. And by heading over to patreon.com/rcpress, and you become a patron for as little as $5 a month. Thank you, Jenny. I will get that, and I will tweet it out. Thank you so much for the info. Thank you, everybody who tuned in tonight, staying up, and all you who are doing that organizing, man. See ya.